A sixth grader and a retired lawyer attempt to make every child's dream come true. Hi everyone, I'm Jacob, I'm the Cowhat Librarian, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about Class Action by the very talented Stephen B. Frank. I stumbled onto this after reading a different book dealing with a very similar subject, and I quite enjoyed it, and I thought I'd talk about it today. So, Sam is in 6th grade, and he's a typical 6th grader. He wants to hang out with his friends more than he does. He wants to do more fun things than he has time for, and he feels he has way too much homework. Now, that sounds like a pretty typical complaint, but the sheer amount of homework Sam is dumped with day in and day out makes it so he barely has time to play the piano and can't build a tree house in his yard with his dad as they've been planning for months, and barely sees his older sister who's buried in even more homework from high school, and even has to use a guided meditation app to help overcome his anxiety related to homework so he can sleep at night. It's too much. It's ridiculous. Now, luckily, there's a small amount of hope on the horizon. A long weekend is coming up, and Sam thinks that he'll finally have a little bit of time to be caught up and have some spare time when his teacher mercilessly dumps a giant review package on their desk the day before the long weekend and says that it should only take a couple of hours a day to complete over the weekend. With the prospects of his semi-free weekend dashed, Sam's had enough. He drops the packet and stands on his desk with a small sign he makes and says, "No more homework." And a few other students join him, and they make signs and they stand up too. And the teacher warns them that if this continues, there's going to be trouble. And the principal gets involved. And one by one, the students all back down except for Sam. And he is suspended from school. So during his suspension, Sam happens to notice that his neighbor across the street has a newspaper in the gutter, and Sam decides to do him a favor and pick it up and deliver it to his door so it won't get wet. And when he does that, his neighbor, a crotchety old man named Mr. Kalman, asks him, "Well, why aren't you in school? Aren't you supposed to be there?" And Sam says, "Well, I was suspended. This happened and they told me to go home." And Mr. Kalman tells him, "Well, wait a minute. Go look up this case." Well, as it turns out, after Sam gets some help from his sister, who practices mock trials and such for her high school, he finds out that that case indicated that children must be given a proper hearing with their parents in attendance before any punishment like this can be exacted. In essence, Sam needs his day in court, so he and his older sister and his parents go to the school and demand a hearing, and he's given one, and the punishment is immediately reinstated. Well, Sam's older sister doesn't take this lying down because she realizes what pushed Sam to the brink. It was the homework. The homework that is absolutely drowning her has Sam immersed up to his ears. And that's only at 6th grade. So she takes it upon herself to recruit Mr. Kalman to sue the Los Angeles County School Board regarding homework on the grounds that it is unconstitutional. Now, Mr. Kalman's retired, his wife has passed away, he's kind of a grump, he doesn't want to do this, but Sadie pesters him into it by sending him a ton of brochures for retirement homes and the like. And ultimately she convinces him, and so on behalf of Sam, Mr. Kalman sues the school board. And the court case proceeds from there. Sam and his friends and his sister and her boyfriend all gather evidence and make videos online to earn money to be put towards the costs of the trial, especially if they lose. And they go to court. And they lose their case. And they appeal it to their circuit court. And they lose the case. And at that point, things have gotten bad. Sam's mom loses her job as a realtor because of her association with Sam. And her employer is very aware that the high school rating in their neighborhood is what is driving sales. And he's worried about the knock-on effects of Sam's protest and lawsuit. And to try to smooth things over, Sam gives up. He heads for home, starts working on schoolwork, makes himself a pot of coffee in the middle of the night so he can stay up and get it all done in time. And finally, all his family realizes how bad things have gotten. Sadie grabs the coffee pot out of his hand and wrestles it away from him before he can drink it. She marches them over to Mr. Kelman's house in the middle of the night and demands that he take their case to the Supreme Court. It was great. This book is a real call to action for parents and students alike that homework might be getting a little overblown. There have been various studies that they point to in passing in this book that homework isn't beneficial at all prior to high school, and it really brings that issue to light in a fun and clever way. Now, I loved it. I liked Sam a lot as a character. I liked his family dynamic between his parents and his half-sister. Mr. Kelman was a great crotchety old lawyer who was back in the saddle for one last adventure. In that way, it felt almost like a classic Western movie. And I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. And if you've read things like if you read things like The Homework Strike by Greg Pincus and enjoyed it, you'd really like this, and vice versa. If you enjoyed things like possibly the Ungifted and Super Gifted books by Gordon Corman, I think you'd get a lot out of this, and I recommend it. Now, with that said, I do have to warn you that there are spoilers ahead as I talk about a few of the deal breakers. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed this book, but a few things just rubbed me the wrong way. First off, I know that Stephen Frank is probably a contemporary of mine, or maybe a little bit older or younger, but the reference to the truffle shuffle from Goonies as a celebratory thing of sorts felt really odd, and I don't know that a lot of kids reading this book would get it right off the bat. The fact that Sadie is so involved in the case for Sam was wonderful, but her proficiency at it would seem to argue in favor of the homework situation that they're trying to avoid. She has turned out to be an incredibly bright, motivated, insightful person in spite of all the homework piled on her, and that runs a little bit counter to the message of the book. It feels like Stephen Frank could have done a better job showing her own burnout rather than just showing how wonderful and smart and dedicated she is, because it kind of runs contrary to his point. And finally, at the end of the book, as I'm sure you've guessed, like any book like this is going to end up at the Supreme Court, and it is almost certainly going to end up with some kind of victory. At the end of the book, it ends up being Sadie that makes the argument in front of the Supreme Court. And when I first read the book, I did not expect that twist. It was fantastic. It was well done. It happened in a way that I could very much believe it being orchestrated that way by Mr. Kelman. The problem is that the Supreme Court is a very rule-oriented place. And when there's a rule in place that a person appearing before the Supreme Court must have argued in the highest court in their state, saying that Sadie did a mock trial that happened to take place at her state's highest courtroom, that wouldn't cut it in a million years. I'm sorry, it was a great book. I loved that twist, but I can't believe for a second they would honestly accept that as a reason for allowing her to argue in front of the Supreme Court. Still, it was great, and the wrap-up was fantastic. And there was a line in the end, in the wrap-up, that may be just a little bit sniffly, and it's silly, but there's a line at the end in the aftermath of the trial that Sadie is accepted to universities she never even applied to, all because of some reference letters written by 9 men and women in a very, very high place. And I loved it. I liked it a lot. That part I did believe could happen, that a panel of justices that were that impressed by a high schooler's arguments would advocate on her behalf to further her career. I liked it. So anyway, I highly recommend it. If you like it, go check out The Homework Strike by Greg Pincus. You won't regret it. It's a lot of fun too. And with that, please like, please subscribe, and please keep checking back to see what else I come up with from the Cowhat Library. Thank you. Bye now.